I must say, I thought I'd be the person who saw the biggest wave. But I wasn't looking to find a big wave. I was a nice Jewish boy from Sea Point going on a holiday to Thailand. And I certainly wasn't chasing the wave. I was really just chasing to go sit on the beach and have a good time. And in the year 2004, I'd never heard the word tsunami. I don't know if anyone else had, but I certainly hadn't. I'd heard of tidal waves, but I'd never heard this tsunami word. And on Boxing Day 2004, I arrived in Phuket, Thailand, with a whole lot of friends who'd been going annually to the same place. And it was just a normal day in Thailand, beautiful place, if any of you have been there. And I woke up very early on Boxing Day, together with a mate of mine, a friend of mine, and his girlfriend. And the three of us went for a run on the beach. And beautiful beach. It was sort of like Camps Bay, that sort of distance in Camps Bay. We ran on the beach. I wasn't really a runner, but he was. And we were chatting and saying, wow, what a beautiful, this is paradise. It really is paradise. And while we were running, we were unaware that deep in the Andaman Sea, not very far from where Phuket was, there was a massive earthquake. In fact, it was the largest earthquake measured in modern history. And it triggered a wave which came towards Thailand and many other countries at the speed of a jetliner. And what had happened was we had finished the run, and in one of the sort of classic cases of sliding doors, his name was Maury and his girlfriend, he said to me, please come join us at a little cafe to get some fruit, and don't have those big breakfast buffets. And now, I like a big breakfast buffet. I like a buffet. So it was a nice Jewish boy from Sea Point. So I decided, in that moment, I'm going for the big breakfast buffet, and he went next door to the little cafe. Couldn't have been 20 minutes later, we heard this tumultuous noise outside. And actually what had happened was that the wave of the tsunami had come into Phuket. Now, nobody then knew what a tsunami was, and certainly I didn't. In fact, initially I first thought it was a terrorist attack. And why I thought it was a terrorist attack, because I'd been reading in the Singapore Times the day before, in the Straits Times, I'd been reading that there was terrorist activity. But in fact, it was the biggest natural disaster in modern history. And the wave came in at a huge speed, and unlike the previous speaker, I didn't run into the wave. I ran away as fast as I could from this particular wave. Sadly and unfortunately, what had happened to my friend was he had gone with his girlfriend into a cafe on the Phuket beachfront, and the wave had come in, and he was instantly killed together with 300,000 other people in the world, in multiple countries, through that tsunami. And after the tsunami happened, when I came back to South Africa, at that stage of my life, I was a very well-known auctioneer, and I went around to all our different branches around South Africa because people were so interested in this tsunami story. People still are. In fact, it was 20 years last year since the tsunami, and people would ask me questions. And one of the questions, which was the most poignant question of all, was, what have you learnt from the tsunami? And I suppose I answered quite quickly and instantly. I said, look, my biggest lesson from the tsunami was that when a big wave comes, run. Unlike the previous speaker, when a big wave comes, he runs into the wave. But the real tsunami for me happened 8 years later. And for me, it was both a business tsunami, it was also personal. And it happened on the 10th of December, 2011. And by 2011, I'd started a business when I was, believe it or not, 21 years old at UCT in the Leslie cafeteria, peddling properties to the people working at the Leslie cafeteria, for those of you who know them. And I was peddling properties because my late father was an attorney in the northern suburbs. My mother was a sort of part-time estate agent, and I was selling homes. And one day I stumbled across an auction not very far from here, and I went to an auction, and I thought, this was so interesting. And I literally decided at the age of 20 that I was going to become an auctioneer. And I did become an auctioneer. And truth be told, over an instant success story that lasted 10 years, I probably became one of the largest auctioneers that this country had ever seen. In fact, the company, I started a company, I'd sold it to CEF at the time. They'd listed on the stock exchange. When I was 24, I'd sold out. And the company became bigger and bigger and bigger, to the point by when I was in my sort of late 30s, we were selling a few billion rand, about 5 billion rands worth of real estate per year. And the company had become extremely well known. We had branches all over South Africa. We'd open up in Dubai, we're in Namibia. And it was represented 60% of every auction conducted in South Africa was conducted by the company which I headed up, called Auction Alliance. And then one day, as things happen, we all know the story that your life can change in seconds. And I'd seen it in the tsunami, but I didn't see this big wave coming. And boy, was it a big wave, but I didn't see it. And what actually happened was, I arrived at a farm not very far from here, a wine estate. In fact, when I was driving through, I was coming through from Paarl, and I saw it. There it was, the Quinrock Winery. And I'd been instructed by the South African Revenue Services to sell this farm. And SARS had told me before the auction, they said, look, we want 75 million rand for this farm. And that was my instruction. And on that day, the auction happened, and I was pushing up the price to get to the reserve. And a very well-known person, a billionairess, South Africa's wealthiest person, accused me of ghost bidding, of pushing up the price. And at that stage, the story wasn't really rooted in legal fact. It was actually rooted in a great media story. And it was a great media story, because it was the story of a jet-setting auctioneer who was running an enormous company, who was really pushing up the price. And the story took on, and it took great legs. And the waves of stories and media that came at me were enormous. Now today we all live in a world where actually there's a scandal a minute. We do. I mean, if you think of the Donald Trump era, I mean, there is a scandal. There's so many scandals that we can't even keep up with the scandals. But in the year 2011 and then in early 2012, there was a thing called newspapers. I mean, you're all too young to have remembered those days. It was like this sheet of paper that we used to read. But the ghost bidding scandal became big news. And the empire which I had built, up from a 21-year-old until I was, in fact, I just turned 40, the empire that I built collapsed overnight. And from that collapse, I literally disappeared. And for me personally, it wasn't just a commercial failure. It wasn't a financial failure. I never went bankrupt. No one ever lost any money. But it was a media scandal, a big media scandal. And I was caught up in the middle of the media scandal. Did I handle it well? Not at all. Did I do the right things? Not at all. I made many, many mistakes. And so being an auctioneer was very much part of my personality. Being a CEO was who I was. I mean, if you think of it, it was actually most of my life. Till that point, I was an auctioneer and I was a CEO. And all of a sudden, I disappeared. But worse than that, actually, there were investigations which lasted many, many years, because I was accused of fraud. I was accused of actually pushing up the price at an auction, and the story got legs. And when it got legs, actually, what happened was the authorities started investigating it. So not only now was I all over the media, but certainly what happened was the Hawks and the police started investigating me as well. And I shut down the business. I never liquidated it. And I didn't know what to do. I was in panic. I was in crisis. And I truly saw no way out of this tsunami. But I dug deep, and I remembered what had happened to me previously. And so step by step, I really tried to rebuild my life and rebuild my career. And I didn't have it. And so the first thing I actually did was I decided I'd go back to study. So at the age of 42, I went back to study. I became a student again, and I did an MBA actually in the University of California, and then I did a further MBA in Singapore. But while all of this was going on, actually, there were all these investigations. And every time I'd leave South Africa, I was absolutely frightened that I'd be arrested at the airport. It so happened that in 2015, there was, in fact, a court case. Nothing to do with me. And the court case actually said that what I had done was not illegal. And what it said I had done, in fact, it went right up to the Supreme Court of Appeal in Bloemfontein, and the judges said that, look, the role of an auctioneer is actually to protect the price of the seller, and it's exactly what I've been doing. And of course, when that story came out, there was one little tiny piece at the back page of the Sunday Times said, well, probably what Rael Levitt did was not illegal, but it was too little and too late. And so I had to start again, and I did start again. And I started a new business, and it was tough. It was really, really tough. Because when I first started it, no one wanted to give me money. And in many ways, we all tell ourselves stories. And I told myself the story that no one would ever want to do business with me ever again. But I was wrong. But I believed my story. I believed my own negative story about myself. And we all do that. We tell ourselves a story, and we live by the story. And so I started again. And I started a business called Inner Space. In the beginning, it wasn't easy. And then all of a sudden, I hadn't been at it very long, in 2017, and all of a sudden, another story appeared. And it said, the crook is back in town. It basically said that. And I remember one day I went to, I love a little deli. I go to a deli in Willie Point, and I walked into the deli, and a guy saw me, and he said to me, do you know, you look just like that crooked auctioneer Skip the Country. So I said, look, I don't know him, I've heard about him. But I heard he's coming back. And I did come back. And so I built this company step by step until 2020. I built it up from a zero value company into a R1 billion company. And then when COVID came, I just thought, wow, I've seen this story before. And while the world panicked, I was absolutely chilled. I was calm because I knew it was temporary panic. And so I worked every day, and during that period, we really actually doubled the size of the company. And 2 years ago, we did a large deal with a large listed REIT at that stage. And in fact, the chairman is here today, unknowingly. And I did another 1.25 billion rand transaction, to the point where the company actually today is worth 3 billion rand. When Auction Alliance had ended, it was 300 million rand. And so the company had been 10 times larger than it ever was. And the day we signed that transaction, I thought to myself, wow, your life really is an interesting story. Not my life, all of our lives. Our lives are stories. And I signed that transaction, and I went for another run. This time in Johannesburg, nowhere near a wave. And I cried every step of that way, because I thought to myself, wow, we all know the truth is that it really does take a tsunami to know what you're made of. Thank you very much.